welcome all. My name is Jessie, like you just mentioned, and I work in various sciences and mathematics for the library. There are a couple of other science librarians here at TTU Libraries. However, I'm the STEM affiliate, so I'll be going over some information about creating a data management proposal. I'll be showcasing a tool that I think might be helpful for you and any of your collaborators. And I'll hopefully have a little bit of time to answer any questions that you might have. So let's get going. So I'd like to start with talking very briefly about just the stages of the data cycle as you're going through your proposal. So when you have a proposal for a project or a grant, you want to have a planning stage. You're going to have a collecting stage, a managing and sharing stage, and then you publish. But that's not where it ends. So that's kind of where you're seeing it. But the data itself continues to have its own flow. So this is actually more accurate. So that previous slide was more about kind of how you see it. This is what actually the data is going through as it progresses through the cycle. So there's the proposal, so you have to come up with an idea. And then you have the project, and you're starting up, you're getting everything set up and prepared to go with your project. Then you go into a period of data collection and data analysis, and sometimes that analysis then goes back and adds and changes the type of data that you're collecting. And then it'll proceed through, then you want to share your data, potentially work on your data with your collaborators internal to the project. Then it's the end of the project. You would do your publishing at that point. Then you need to find out if there's something that you want to do with that data. So you have to have a plan for either keeping that data for others to use, disposing of it properly, or managing other parts of the data. So then you could potentially put it in an archive, which it could be used for more discovery, adding to your own project or adding to additional creative endeavors. So that is kind of the flow that data goes through. So with that kind of as the framework, I'm going to kind of talk about more of the specifics and nitty-gritty today. So the topics we're going to be covering specifically are data types, storage and backup, data documentation and metadata, data access, ownership, and intellectual property, data sharing, citation, and reuse, preserving and archiving your data, and then we're going to go over a few more resources and specifically the DMP tool, which I'm going to be showcasing for you. Okay, so data types, storage, and backup. So there's different types of data you might be familiar, and especially familiar as you're thinking about what data you're going to have. What immediately comes to mind is observational data. So numbers, letters, measurements. This is all raw data, and then also experimental data. So phrases or things that are something from what you use in your experimentation. But there are other things beyond those particular data types. So you might have schematics, which you use to create a particular instrument. That could be data. There might be images of particular objects that you had photographed throughout the data collection process. There might be other images like graphs and charts. There might be scientific logs, so scientific notebooks, things of this nature, specimens or artifacts, or maps or diagrams, and anything potentially could be data in this context. So when you're talking about data, you have to start thinking about what could be data, what's important to your project, what are your goals with the project, and who your potential audience is and who could benefit from this in the future. So all of those go into deciding what is and what isn't data. So there's different types of data storage, especially, and we're talking digital. So there's your local device, which is your own personal computer or laptop. Then there's cloud-based storage. So this would be your like a Google storage or other types, maybe purchase Dropbox, subscription-based storage. And then you have university, the university provides you 2 gigabytes of combined storage for your MyWeb, and then also just any additional space that you need. And then beyond that, you can request from IT Help Central to get either whether maybe you need more storage, maybe you need more processing power for your data. That would be something to talk to IT Help Central regarding your IT requests if you're thinking you're going to need beyond those 3 items. So it's recommended, best practice, that you have 3 copies. You maintain 3 copies of your data. One would be the master copy, the working copy, the one that you're working on currently. And then you should have some kind of external local storage. So that would be maybe like with your institution, but you could also have a variant of that. You could have a hard drive, an external hard drive that you back up to. And a lot of these can be set up automatically to happen periodically. So you could set it up periodically to happen every day or every week so that your materials that you collected that particular day have an additional copy. And then the 3rd copy is an external or remote. So that could also potentially be the institution, but it also could be some type of cloud. So this is a recommended practice for the safest way of storing your information. So if you decide to do maybe 2 of these, it's certainly going to be safer than just having it on your personal computer. Okay, so things that can happen to data which cause it to go away. So data can be or problems, or create other problems. I mean, there could be other complications as well. So your data could get stolen. So there's a couple of problems with that. You could have competition coming in and trying to take advantage or take the credit for the data you've collected, and then also they could be using it for nefarious purposes. So like if there's personal information or something like that, and also they could just be stealing, just taking it away from you. Disaster, so natural disaster or not so natural disaster, a pipe breaks or something terrible like that happens, and then all your research information is gone. There could be technical errors or corruption, so things could get overwritten by each other. Things could get accidentally deleted or misplaced. So then, and then mistaken loss or deletion. Someone drags or dumps something from a file accidentally. It could be you, it could be a collaborator. So these are some of the things that backups really help with when you seem to be missing a particular file or set of files. So next is data documentation and metadata. So file naming, directory structure, and metadata go into this category. So you'll want to collect information. So this is a recommendation for the file name itself. So the status, some kind of status of that particular file. It could be a title type status or some kind of description. So location could be potentially important, the date of collection, and then the file type. So descriptive labels and descriptions within your files can also be helpful. So if you want to create an additional kind of document that describes what those data files are, what their relationship is to each other, what their relationship is to other files in your directory, that can also really lend a lot of value into into a set of files. And then also you might want to document the people who were collecting that set of data and the times that they were collecting that data. And I just want to play for you this little short clip of this person's experience with doing file naming.
Hi, my name's Dave Anderson, and I'm here to tell you what not to do when you want to archive your data so that it can be preserved and used by others years from now. These are 3 examples of common mistakes that I made in my own research 20 years ago. The first example, here are a couple of files saved in proprietary formats, .wks and an older format from Quattro Pro. Remember those early spreadsheet programs? Try sending these files to a colleague today just to drive them nuts. In contrast, both the ASCII files and the comma-separated value files shown here can be read by any program and will remain readable for many years to come. Another mistake I made is the too short file description, the too short description of what was measured. Here, I succeeded in using the shortest possible designation for a column header, S. It made a lot of sense to me at the time, but I bet you don't know what S is. And here, core 1 has to be the most common core name in the world. If only I had used a little more information to describe what I measured, it wouldn't matter if I got hit by a bus. These data would still be usable. My final mistake to show you is the vague or the pithy file name. Here's a file name I liked at the time called win.dat. After a little bit of effort looking inside this file, I can see that a much more descriptive file name would have been tdf11-taux-july.csv. tdf11 describes the source of the data, data family 11. taux describes the variable that was measured. July describes the time period. And CSV describes the format of a file. So there you have it. 3 common mistakes that would not have taken much time to do better and would have made sharing these files 18 years later much easier. It might even have increased my citation rate.
All right, so other things to be in consideration of is the way that you structure your directories. This can give you groupings of various file types so that certain sets of information are grouped together, and that can lend to information about what is in those particular files. Also, it's a way to manage access and permissions by having things by planning a directory with different areas. You can give access to certain areas and restrict access to other areas. Also, you may want to provide more description of your folders and your files, and even create a directory map. So basically charting out where folders should be in relationship in their hierarchy. So that way you can easily know if one goes missing or one is moved, or where the proper directory position for that file should be. So here are some, I'm not going to go through all 10 of these, but here's a good list of these items I'm happy to share with you. These are kind of a list of 10 best practices for documenting what, where, when, and who about files and directories. Especially want to point out that you can, so what you've seen most of this before, but using table of contents, and then just providing documentation on all of your files. So having a person and a date, especially when you're working with a group of people, is going to improve your ability to trace the data that you've created, and so that you can answer those missing questions in the event that you have an S and you don't know what S means. So naming and dating can help you manage large sets of data and large groups of collaborators, so that you can make those clarifications as you go through your data process. Okay, so metadata standards. So a metadata standard is something that is required of a particular, usually in a particular database. And this might be something that you might consider if you're going to be putting your data in a repository at the end of your project. So before you get started on your project, you might consider what repository you're going to use and find out if they have any minimum requirements or any specific naming conventions, and put those conventions in so you don't have to go back and reformat all of your information before it ends up in the repository. Or you don't have to try to manufacture that information from your existing data. So if you have missing metadata requirements. Okay, so data access and ownership and intellectual property. And I wanted to preface that I am not a copyright expert. I have familiarized myself with copyright, but I would not take myself as a legal advisor. That being said, I do know a little bit about the subject. So we're going to talk a little bit about the control, release, and sharing of data. So in regards to data, sharing data, the its legal ownership. So I get this question: is data copyright protected? Pretty much. So the answer is there isn't really a lot of copyright protection. According to copyright law, in no case does copyright protection extend to any idea, concept, principle, or discovery. So the data itself is a fact. The data itself is not copyrightable because it has to be, for copyright to work, we have to be able to discuss ideas, share ideas, manipulate ideas and concepts and facts in different ways to come up with new ones. So, so you might say, oh, well, we did a lot of work to get all this data. Shouldn't that be protected? Well, actually, this was decided in 1991 by Feist Publications versus the Rural Telephone Services. Feist had taken the data that the rural telephone services had collected, reformatted, and republished that data, that information or data. So they ended up winning their lawsuit. The lawsuit was Feist ended up winning the lawsuit against Rural, who had sued them, because basically they had created a new format or a new way of looking at those particular phone numbers. And so copyright only comes from creative expression, not from the work that you're doing. So if you can compile the data in a new and different and unique and creative way, then you can say that you have copyright over that particular way of using that information. You can't say that you have copyright over the data itself. So patent, though, you can actually patent data where data is not novel, non-obvious, or applied to the real world. And I would recommend asking a patent expert for more details on exactly what aspects of data. So like an invention, like I was talking about a schematic. you could potentially patent that type of data and use that for a while to continue with whatever project you're working on, or gain payments from that. So another way to protect data is with secrecy. So people are not allowed to take your information if you have taken steps to keep it secret. And people who are trying to take data that you have made steps to keep secret can be sued for stealing your trade secrets. So if you make efforts to keep information private, then you have legal protection for keeping that data secret. So other considerations you might have, there might be contracts or grants. So there might be conditions on your data. So someone might be funding you, and as a part of that contract or grant, you must provide a certain amount of data, a certain type of data. You have to put it in a particular location. So that would all end up influencing the intellectual property and the ownership of the particular data. Also, your institution might have requirements on intellectual property, on technology transfer, on data sharing, and then of course there is human subject information that has to go under review. Also, HIPAA or FERPA might be placing additional requirements as it relates to medical and other type of confidential information. So these are all ways that influence or impact the way you might collect your data, and the way you might organize your data, and the way you might share the data.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Who at Texas Tech University would be in a position to advise us if we had to, quote, get into that carefully on a particular issue?
So I would first recommend the Vice President Office of Research as the person who would have the authority. However, in terms of making or counseling on those, I don't know specifically their resources.
Okay.
So they would be I would say in terms of Texas Tech University, the authority or the responsible party as it relates to the institution. However, you could yourself have certain liabilities as well. So I'm sorry I don't have more information regarding. This is something that I'd like to improve at the university, is knowing. So, well, obviously there's IRB, but in terms of who might be a copyright expert or a patent expert or a HIPAA or FERPA, I would recommend the Office of Research to make those.
I can answer a little bit more on that. The VPR's office did take over the tech transfer office, and so they would be the ones that would, if you do a disclosure, would farm out that idea to see if it's patentable or copyrightable. IRB, I think, is under that office also. Donna Peters is the one that handles that. They
Sure.
think it's HIPAA or FERPA, Health Sciences Center. IRB is probably going to handle anything that involves anything medical.
So I would just say my situation is that I'm looking at a grant with 3 different universities involved, each one of us bringing existing data to the table, and then us collectively, in addition to that, collecting additional data, and then having a sponsor who in their contract documents talk about, we're going to own the data. And so there are just lots of questions that come up that seem like have to be sorted out pretty carefully before you go forward. It's not IRB, it's
Do you know about
not
that?
HIPAA. It's
At the OPPR, there's the research development team, RDT, with Kayla
I
Tindall.
do know about it.
Okay,
Yeah.
they might be able to.
Well, I just hadn't thought about it in this particular way. I
Yeah.
thought about it as a thing, not a path. So
But they've done multi-institutional contracts and negotiations.
okay.
Okay. So for all these parts or all these data pieces, you might want to ask, so who can access and when can they access opposite. So in terms of the public sphere, public access might constitute an organizational compilation like a data archive that might be subject specific, it might be affiliation specific. So it might be with a particular set of scientists or organization for scientists, or it might be associated with a particular institution. Also, there's the public web, so someone might want to publish some of this data or information on a public website, so their own personal website. Also, subscription-based access, so that would be journal subscriptions or larger database subscriptions, and some of these things kind of overlap into each other. So that would all be a part of public access to data. Something that I didn't mention here is also you could have a repository or archive that's actually a physical place. So such as the Southwest Collection, where you have to visit that particular location, and then you have artifacts or things that you can only engage with in person, or terminals that are not attached to networks or the public web. So those are also different ways of providing access to data that would be public. Okay, so and then private access would be your inter-collaborators, so like you were talking about institutional, intra-institutional collaborators, your supervisors, your advisors, your students. So all of these people may have various or need various levels of access to your particular set of data. And then also your competitors may be interested in your data and you may not want to share it. So just have that as a consideration that there are competitors out there. So you might measure that against the level of access that you're providing and use that as part of your consideration on who and when. So, and what precautions you want to take surrounding those. So, also there might be cultural and various other expectations. So that might be as a part of your lab. Your lab might have workflows that they have expectations for, and standard practices. Your field of study might have certain expectations that you should be providing a certain type or level of information. The institution will have expectations, and then there are real world consequences. For you may have to make a decision, well, I hadn't planned on releasing this data, but maybe as an ethical reason, I should use this data in a way that I hadn't originally planned. Okay, and then ultimately, you have to evaluate by both individually and as a group with who you are working with, all of the shareholders, including the institutions, the collaborators, all those different people. What is your goal? And are they the same or how are they different? And what impact does that have on your field of study? So what is your goal as a scholar? What is trying to be accomplished here? And what are the near-term goals and what are the long-term goals? So data sharing, citation, and reuse. So there are benefits to sharing data. They can be used to validate results, so they can make sure you can use data other people can use your data, and you can use your data to check facts, to look at things in a different way. You can generate new analysis, so entirely new and novel ideas, and new creation of new applications for that data. And then also it is associated with increased citation. So if you make your data available, people are going to find your publications and cite them more. They're going to look into your ideas and what your thoughts are with regards to the data that they're using. So it's also associated with increased citation use. So now in terms, and we talked a little bit about the data collection, you can actually still, even though there's limited copyright, you can still request attribution, and I would recommend that. So that would, to request attribution, you should put something, in regards to your data set that says, please, cite this data when you use it. And then also include a date that it was published, so the year, the title. So if you title your set of information, it's going to be a lot easier. So I would recommend giving it a title, and then the data, choose a data repository. That is also part of a citation. And then also, if you can provide it a permanent URL, then that's helpful for individuals who might attribute their use of your work. So also you might consider, who do you want to share it with? So researchers, policymakers, and the public. You might format your data in different ways for each of those different audience members. So do you want to release it immediately as it's being created? So like you have a sensor off in some part of the world, and it feeds that information into a website, so you can have real world updates regarding that data. Upon publication, so maybe you're waiting to publish on a particular set of data, maybe you should wait until after that publication comes out so that you can use that information in your creative way. And then upon request, that would be having the data, keeping the data, but not providing it unless it's been specifically requested. And then there's direct personal requests, online archive, and then here I mentioned print or local access. So data repositories, what can they do? Okay, so they can add value by tracking downloads. So say that you put your data in a particular archive, you can find out how much it's being used potentially, depending on the resource you're using. They also provide for certain formatting and interface. So they might provide a particular user interface that is above and beyond what you're putting into the data itself. And also they can manage and update that information, so basically transfer it from one format to another as those things change over time. And I wanted to show you a particular one that I thought was pretty snazzy. Do we have time for this?
NISA will transform your ability to do research, to collaborate, and to teach earthquake engineering topics. Upload and securely store your research data. Share it with your team, and use integrated visualization and simulation tools. Navigate easily through many projects and find the experimental data you need. You can quickly plot data from the project warehouse right in the browser. NIST.org. Now, there's a hub for that.
So I found that one to be particularly exciting way of making their database services available. But there's where am I at? Oh, here we go. So here's actually a registry of research data repositories. It's a long list, and there's a lot of different flavors. And so over 1,000 research data repositories. So that, find the flavor for you. So, and then, consider and each one is kind of tailored to a different audience. But these are places that you could end up depositing this information so that could be used and reused in the future. Okay. Okay, last up, before I get into the more specifics of that DMP tool, preserving and archiving data. So now you've gone all the way through. You've collected all your data. You've decided what to do with it, or whether to publish it. Now the last part is to figure out what to do with all this stuff at the end, and how you're going to keep track of it. So what is the long-term value of your data? Can it be recreated easily? So if this is something that, you have a source code and it runs a program, maybe you just need the source code. Maybe you don't actually need the program itself. So that could be something that you would consider. Whereas, let's say it is a natural phenomenon that only happened once and the data is completely unique and could never be replicated. Then you might consider if that might be important for a future application. You might consider who else might be interested in that particular observation. So that's, and then also sometimes data just gets replaced. It loses its value because there's newer, better data that ends up taking the place of that particular data. So these are all questions that might go into if you decide to provide long-term access to your data. Also, be aware that digital, especially digital stuff, has some pitfalls, but in addition with actual physical objects in general. So there's deterioration of particular, so they actually fall apart or get weathered or are not properly stored, etc. Sometimes the format goes obsolete, so you no longer have you have data stored on a particular format, which no longer has a device that can read that format. And then also software version updates. I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with that one because that's probably the most common one that people run into. So just some suggestions on preserving, if you decide to do some preserving of your own. Think about what file formats are gonna be the longest term. Don't think in terms of a specific vendors or types like that. You want to. I mean, yes, MS Word does save in text format and PDF format. You might want to go ahead and start creating your data management tool with this kind of words and phrasing, and then use those in your design, in your project design. So PDF, TXT, HTML, MPEG, DBF. Though I understand Oracle and SQL Server don't really like that, but you can get it converted. But this has been around for a while. Comma separated values, very, very good. That's always going to be a great way of preserving information. PDFs, yeah, and then WAV files. So these are some some ways that you might consider thinking about your file formatting as you're preserving it. Okay, so and then also you might want to preserve a persistent URL somewhere, a link that goes to that place over and over again, so that way people are not going to a link and expecting to find data and not finding it. And then also security and backup and updating. And the digital data repository and institutional repository can do those things for you. So that they're there to help with that process. Okay, so here are some more tools and resources. The DMP tool, which I've mentioned before. Here are also some links that I found to be quite helpful. I really like Curtin University Library's guide on data management. Now they are in Australia, so their laws are slightly different, but I would say that they have a really great way of portraying information. So I really like this particular library guide that they have that discusses the naming conventions and the other types of problems you might run into. And then also University of Washington has a great list of general resources. So like, where do I find data about, where would I put this type of data, or where would I put that type of data? And then also we have our ThinkTech and DSpace, so the TTU digital repository here at Texas Tech Universities. I urge you to consider it when you're thinking about your data preservation needs. And the individual to speak with specifically, you could certainly contact me or the libraries in general and just ask for ThinkTech or DSpace, but Christopher Starcher is the individual who would be mediating that process. So, without more ado, I'm going to give you a little look at the DMP tool. So, the DMP tool is hosted from the University of California, and we at Texas Tech are a member institution, which means that we've said, okay, we want to be part of the folks that use this tool. So, let's see, first you want to log in. And I've already logged in, but there's a little login. First time you do this, it's going to ask you a little bit of information about yourself, so fill out the form, and then you're ready to go. So, and so then here on my dashboard, I can see that I have some current DMPs, my DMPs, so ones that I've already created. So this is that grant. I'm already ahead of you. I'm getting that makerspace DMP. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, awesome. No. But yeah, so here's the ones that you've already made, or so you can go into them, and then you can share them. So if you're working as a collaborator, you might want to share work with this work with someone else as you're forming it. So, and here's my profile. So this is kind of the information about me. I can stick my ORCID ID if I have one in right here, and link that information to the DMP. So here in creating a new DMP, I'm going to go to select template. And also, there are going to be some examples. So if you find something that is in one of these examples, you can go through some of these open ones, and you can actually make yours public too, or you can move it from private to public, so that way people can kind of use you as an example for best practices in a particular field. But so you select a template, and let's say I'm going to get a grant from the NSF in the area of, I don't know, physics. Physics sounds like a good place to be getting a grant. So I would just fill out a title. The title is the only required information, and then also, so you will, if you do have a co-owner, ask them to create a profile. So otherwise, so that if I added, so let's say I added. Let's say I added Jerry Dwyer, it's not going to find him. So you need to be in that. Your collaborators need to be part of.
Everybody needs a profile
before you add them to your collaboration. Okay. So then this provides basically a step-by-step of the different sections that are required. And you can look at this thing up, if you have a bigger browser or something like that, or a bigger screen. If you just want to zoom out, you can make it big, you can make it small, and then you apply what you've thought about in especially today, the different types of things that you might want to put in there, and then it's going to tell you specifically. It's going to ask you questions as well, so that you can elaborate and kind of get into more detail. And then also it provides links to facts about that particular template, or that particular organization that's requiring the template, or that organization that is providing a template but doesn't require it, and whatever, maybe they have ways that you might, format data in a particular way that would keep it consistent with the standard practices of your field. Okay, and then I save, and oops, and then I save it, and then it appears in my set of DMPs, and then I can also mark them as submitted or completed, rejected, reviewed, that type of thing. So there's other management aspects for that sort of, for keeping your track of your different DMPs.
So does this just output as some kind of a text file?
I believe it does a PDF.
Okay.
So expert is RTF, PDF. I think those are the two options.
Okay. So if you're doing NSF, you can just take that and load it in Fastlane, not the RTF file.
So export is RTF. I've never actually, so I tell you honestly, I wasn't familiar with that part of it.
Yeah.
Is there a place for the IRB?
For the
Information
IRB, I'm not entirely sure if, in terms of this tool, I don't know if there's a place for the IRB. What I was familiar with is just the form for the form for those specific template in your DMP, the data management.
I bet if you choose the right template, there'd be a logical place to insert that information.
And now, you said transport that into my proposal under in that section. Isn't that a required part of the description? Or is it a separate file?
I think there's a place to upload your data management plan.
A separate place to upload it in? Does it count against the 13 pages or whatever for the description?
Does it allow PDF or does it just want you to paste into the text box?
My gut feeling is you can upload whatever, but if you upload PDF, it's probably not really still it. So it may take 2 minutes instead of 20 seconds. But
And that would all just be NSF specific, I'm not sure.
that probably only matters to me and Jerry who are writing it for 450.
But it's not part of the description.
No,
I don't think that it counts against your page.
Separate file.
But
I think
counting,
it's a
yeah.
separate section in Fastlane.
And it's different from the last one I did.
And I don't know that there's a page limit on the data management tool. I mean, the only data management plan either specifically. I mean, at least I've never been one that's a lot of applying.
I've never heard of anyone having a data management plan that's too long. Yes.
I have a question. I guess it's not clear to me exactly what you achieved with this or how it's done. And so I'll frame it like my question like this. So I'm writing a proposal and I'm going to have a lot of data, and I say I want to have a data management plan. And I
Right.
kind of have in my mind, at least what I had in my mind was that, hey, you've got this tool, the tools sound cool. So there's a kind of a menu-driven approach where it'll go through and ask you all the kinds of questions that would represent best practices for data management, all the things that you just talked about in your presentation,
Yes.
like access and audience and sharing and all that kind of stuff. It would be kind of menu-driven. It would ask you all these questions, and you would essentially say, yeah, and then all of a sudden, boom, it writes this up real nicely. It looks pretty professional and bold. You've got a data management plan. Is that what this does, or does it do something else?
It's just a fancy way of filling out the form, I think, and then also sharing, collaborating, and uploading it. As far as value, so I don't see that it's providing you any kind of like text filler. All it does is, like you said, basically walk you through the different thoughts or questions that you might ask as you're going along, and then you would then respond to it in almost like in a systematic way. So just so that you cover all of the items that would be important in a proposal.
Would you?
And then sometimes these forms are required, like NSF and the NIH have the specific form requirements.
Would you mind navigating back to where it had listed the different templates that
Yes,
people had loaded in there?
yeah, so I'm gonna go back to my dashboard, or home rather, get started. Create new, oh there it is, okay. And then select a template. So, so here under the National Science Foundation, each of these are the different templates that are required for the various professions. And I've never applied for one of these, so I'm not as familiar with like what the codes are all about. Yes, sir?
I have a question for you or for anyone here. So I've done these NSF proposals, and I think there is like a tab for data management, but I didn't know that. Is this something new? Because I've always just put, yeah, we will store the data, our data in a secure location, and it's never been more than that. Because we collect experimental data, but I've never known of any template.
Okay, and so yeah, maybe it's not required, and maybe what you're doing is sufficient to effectively secure an NSF grant. I just know that these are promoted by so here, let's go to this particular NSF. So this is atmospheric and geospace science.
Yeah.
And then you go to next, and then you have these links which are talking about the AGS division. And so here's what they have to say about how this should be. I mean, if they're allowing you to have a grant without this particular format, then it must not be required.
Well, I mean, I
however,
didn't say that any of these proposals were funded. And maybe that's why, because I didn't use the template. I don't know.
Can I actually comment on that? What is happening, and this is where it's getting a little interesting, NIH currently, for very large projects, and I can't remember the numbers, but I'm thinking like $500,000 or so, they are now requiring that there be a system for archiving and sharing data. In other words, they're saying, okay, we paid for it, we own it. If other people want to use it, we might make it available, okay? NSF has now issued directorates with regard, and you see the list there, regarding similar. Now, they're not requiring the data be shared. They're not requiring the data be archived, but they're requiring that a data management plan is in place.
Right.
The thinking is this will progress. And so I think it's a way of getting everybody on board for federally funded projects are going to have publicly accessible data. I think that's the direction that it's taking.
So
Yeah.
stepwise, like, so maybe it's not required right now, but so maybe
Yeah,
it
so-
will be in the future.
Yeah, I haven't thought very deeply about this prior to this presentation, so I think it could be very important to get the thinking in
Yeah.
that direction.
I think that's where you're going to see, and they're starting slow, but I think that they're really, with regard to accountability and issues accountability and, efficiency, meaning data that's collected, if it can be mined for other answers, they want it available.
Yeah.
So I really think that that's the direction things are taking. So it's kind of a awareness thing now.
Look at the second sentence up there.
I don't have my glasses on, so I can't look at it.
Allow me to read it to you. This data
Okay, no,
management plan
this-
will be required in all proposals submitted on or after January 18, 2011.
Right, and
That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's disputing that a data management plan is required for NSF proposals. I think the discussion is
whether the template is a best
And how
guide,
formal that
I
then
think
is,
at
yeah.
this point, it's best practices.
And the impression I've gotten is that there's more interest in seeing better developed data management plans moving forward versus some of the things that we've gotten funded in the past. I think we've got pilots and things that.
I mean, for some of the math stuff, we said there's no data, please leave us alone, don't bother us about this more, although not quite so rudely. But I mean, for like noise, I think we said we're going to lock up the data and not post it on the internet or something, and we'll not keep social security numbers and that kind of stuff or whatever. But that was about as much as we ever said.
And I think a lot of ours amounted to basically dealing with human subjects issues. And I'm curious to poke through these templates because I suspect that there may be some things there that we hadn't thought about before.
When, with regard to what we look at, with regard to research integrity issues, there have been a lot of cases where there have been, say, investigations into misconduct, and the data mysteriously disappears. And so that's part of the agenda. It's like, okay, no. So, and I don't think that's the full agenda. I really think it comes down to the efficiency of being able to share and mine data.
Yeah.
It might even be a way to protect yourself. I would, if you do this properly, then you could say, well, I set out this data management plan and, you know, it was failings on other parts of, you know, these other failings that were a result of whatever ended up happening, but this is the plan and it was, you know, this was approved or approvable, so. So that's, yeah, so that's where the federally funded stuff is going. And then it just, and you know, and like I said in the presentation, there are reasons beyond just government accountability. There's a reason why there's a kind of government accountability, of course. But I think the ultimate goal of this is to create opportunity for the advancement of research, for the advancement of your particular field. And you can actually benefit from doing that. You can benefit from sharing this information, and you can get credit for sharing this information. And we might end up seeing more and more of that happen as we move forward. And you can, yeah, and I certainly recommend that you ask for attribution whenever anyone uses your data. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, thank you all so very much.